I'm Rosie, 30 female. I live in my late grandmother's house, a beautiful old Victorian that I've spent the last 2 years carefully restoring. As an archivist, I find peace in preserving the past, and this house is the most important piece of history I've ever been trusted with. But I soon discovered that the biggest threat to this legacy wasn't time or decay, but my own sister's greed, which she chose to announce in the most humiliating way possible. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. The house on Chestnut Grove wasn't just wood and nails, it was a living archive of our family's history. Grandmother Rachel had been the keeper of that history, and she passed the responsibility and the house itself to me. She used to say I had an old soul, someone who understood that the past needed a gentle hand to carry it into the future. My sister, Chloe, on the other hand, saw the past as something to be bulldozed to make way for the new, the shiny, and the profitable. Our grandmother's garden was her pride and joy, especially her collection of antique roses. She had a variety named Rosie's Delight that she'd cultivated herself, and it was my namesake. She taught me how to prune them, how to feed them, how to protect them from the frost. Some things, Rosie, she'd say, her hands covered in soil, are worth the effort. They have roots. They tell a story. Chloe, meanwhile, would complain about the thorns and the bees. She preferred the clean, sterile aesthetic of modern landscaping, white pebbles and succulents that demanded nothing from you. That was the difference between us in a nutshell. I cherished the roots. Chloe just saw the thorns. When Grandma Rachel passed away 2 years ago, the reading of her will was a quiet, somber affair. Her lawyer, a kind old man named Mr. Abernathy, read her final wishes. The bulk of her modest savings was split evenly between Chloe and me, but the house, her most significant asset, was left entirely to me. The will was explicit. To my granddaughter, Rosie, who understands the soul of this home. May she be its guardian and fill its rooms with as much love as I have. Chloe's reaction was not one of grief, but of quiet, simmering fury. She didn't explode. She just sat there, her expression hardening into a mask of polite disbelief. Her fiancé, Mark, a financial advisor who saw everything in terms of market value and potential returns, put a comforting hand on her arm, but his eyes were doing calculations. I could practically hear the numbers ticking in his head. Square footage, property value, resale potential. To them, I hadn't inherited a home. I'd won the lottery. In the 2 years that followed, I poured my heart, soul, and a significant portion of my savings into the house. The plumbing was ancient, the wiring was a fire hazard, and the roof needed replacing. I did much of the work myself, learning from online tutorials and spending my weekends covered in plaster dust and paint. I meticulously restored the original hardwood floors, reglazed the century-old windows, and of course, tended to Grandma's rose garden, which had never looked more beautiful. The house began to breathe again. It felt happy. Chloe and I maintained a fragile peace. She lived in a sleek, modern condo downtown and worked as a real estate agent. She was good at it, charming, ruthless, and fantastic at staging homes to look like they belonged in a magazine. She would visit my house occasionally, her eyes scanning every improvement with a critical gaze. You know, she'd say, running a finger along a newly sanded banister. If you just update the kitchen with stainless steel and granite, you could probably add another 50 grand to the asking price. I'd just smile and say, I'm not planning on asking, Chloe. My cousin Leo, who was more like a brother to me, understood completely. He was a lawyer and had been there during the will reading. He saw the look on Chloe's face and warned me to be careful. People get weird about inheritances, Rosie, he'd said over coffee one afternoon, especially when they feel like they've been shortchanged. Chloe has always been competitive with you. I brushed it off. I thought her envy was just a passing cloud, a temporary sting of disappointment. I believed that eventually she would come to accept Grandma's decision and be happy for me. I was wrong. The storm was just gathering. The event that brought everything to a head was my 30th birthday party. I decided to host a big garden party at the house. It was late summer, the roses were in their final, glorious bloom, and I felt it was the perfect way to celebrate both my milestone and the completion of the house's restoration. I wanted to fill the home with friends and family, just as Grandma would have wanted. I invited everyone, including Chloe and Mark. I was genuinely hoping it would be a turning point for us, a chance for her to see the love I had poured into our grandmother's legacy and finally let go of her resentment. The day of the party was perfect. The sun was warm, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the ancient oak tree in the backyard, and the air was sweet with the scent of roses. Leo helped me set up, arranging tables and stringing up fairy lights. My friends started to arrive, and the house and garden filled with laughter and music. For a few hours, everything felt right. It felt like a home. Chloe and Mark arrived late, dressed to the nines. Chloe wore a stark white dress that stood out against the vibrant colors of the garden, and Mark had on a suit that looked more appropriate for a boardroom meeting. They mingled for a bit, but I noticed Chloe wasn't really talking to people. She was observing, her eyes darting around, a strange, triumphant little smile playing on her lips. I was too busy being a hostess to pay it much mind, assuming it was just her usual aloofness. Later in the evening, as the sun began to set and the fairy lights twinkled to life, Chloe clinked a champagne glass to get everyone's attention. I smiled, thinking she was going to make a birthday toast. My friends and family quieted down, turning to face her. She stood on the back porch, a silhouette against the warm glow coming from the house, with Mark standing proudly beside her. "I'd like to make an announcement," she began, her voice carrying across the yard with a practiced, professional clarity. "As many of you know, this beautiful house belonged to our grandmother, Rachel. It holds so many memories for our family." She paused, letting the sentimental words hang in the air. I felt a swell of warmth, thinking I had misjudged her. Maybe this was her olive branch. "And for the past 2 years," she continued, her eyes finding mine in the crowd, "my sister Rosie has been its caretaker." The word hung in the air, slightly off-key. But a family legacy is a complicated thing, and sometimes clerical errors and outdated wishes need to be corrected to reflect true fairness. A confused murmur rippled through the guests. I felt Leo move to stand a little closer to me. My smile faltered. This wasn't a toast. This was a performance. Mark handed her a folded document. Chloe unfolded it with a flourish. "I hold in my hand," she announced, her voice rising with theatrical drama, "a legally binding document which clarifies the ownership of this property." It seems Grandma had a change of heart in her final days and ensured that the house would go to the daughter who could make the most of it. Her eyes, cold and hard, locked onto mine. Then came the words that would echo in my mind for months. "Now I'm the owner of that house. Get out." The silence that fell over the garden was absolute. It was as if Chloe's words had sucked all the air and warmth out of the perfect summer evening. The cheerful music from the portable speaker suddenly seemed jarring and out of place. My friends and family stood frozen, their faces a mixture of confusion, disbelief, and second-hand embarrassment. All eyes were on me. I felt 100 pairs of eyes on my face, watching for my reaction, and I could feel the blood draining from it. I stared at my sister, standing on the porch like a queen addressing her subjects. The folded document in her hand looked official, at least from a distance. Mark stood beside her, his arm protectively around her waist, wearing a smug expression that made my stomach turn. He looked like a predator who had just watched his partner successfully trap their prey. This wasn't just Chloe's doing, this was a joint venture. My first thought was that it had to be a joke, a cruel, tasteless, horrifying joke, but a joke nonetheless. Chloe had a mean streak, but this was a new level of malice. I managed a weak, trembling laugh. "Chloe, what are you talking about? That's not funny." Her smile didn't waver, it widened. "I'm not joking, Rosie. This is a deed transfer, signed and notarized. The house is mine. It was finalized last week." She held up the paper again, waving it slightly, as if it were a winning lottery ticket. "Grandma apparently signed it a few weeks before she passed. Mr. Abernathy must have misplaced it. Luckily, Mark's legal team was able to track it down and file it correctly." Mr. Abernathy, Grandma's lawyer for over 40 years, a man so meticulous he alphabetized his spice rack, The idea that he would misplace something so important was ludicrous. A wave of nausea washed over me. This was real. They had planned this. They had waited for the perfect moment, my birthday party, in front of everyone I knew to drop this bomb, maximizing my humiliation. Leo stepped forward, his expression grim. Chloe, what is this nonsense? I was at the will reading. The house was left to Rosie, end of story. Let me see that document. Mark step. Ed in front of Chloe, blocking Leo's path. I don't think so, Leo. This is a private family matter. You're making it a public spectacle, Leo shot back, his voice rising. You can't just wave a piece of paper and claim ownership of a house. That's not how it works. My voice, when I finally found it, was barely a whisper. Why, Chloe, why would you do this? She finally dropped the triumphant facade for a moment, and I saw a flicker of the old resentment in her eyes, the deep-seated jealousy I had always chosen to ignore. Because you didn't deserve it, she snapped, her voice cracking with emotion. You got to be the good one, the one who stayed close to home, who baked cookies with Grandma and listened to her boring stories. I was out in the world, building a career, making something of myself. This house, this asset, it should have gone to the person who knows what to do with it, not someone who wants to turn it into a dusty museum. Her words were like stones, each one hitting me with painful accuracy. She saw my love for our grandmother as a weakness, a tactic to win favor. She saw my profession, my passion for history and preservation, as a joke. In her eyes, I was just a sentimental fool clinging to the past, while she was the savvy businesswoman of the future. The party was dissolving into chaos. Some guests, clearly uncomfortable, were beginning to make their excuses and slip away. Others were whispering amongst themselves, shooting sympathetic glances in my direction. My closest friends gathered around me, their hands on my shoulders, offering a silent wall of support. You have 1 week to vacate the premises, Mark announced, his voice booming with authority. We want to begin renovations as soon as possible. We'll be generous and won't charge you for this last week of occupancy. The sheer arrogance of it was breathtaking. I had spent 2 years of my life, my money, my sweat and tears, restoring this house, and now they were talking about renovations and giving me 1 week to leave my own home. My home. Get out of my house, I said, my voice low but steady. The anger was finally starting to burn through the shock. Chloe laughed, a short, ugly sound. I think you mean my house, sis, and we'll leave when we're ready. We just wanted to give you the news in front of all your friends so there would be no misunderstandings. It was the final twist of the knife. The public humiliation was the point. They didn't just want the house, they wanted to strip me of my dignity, to make sure everyone saw me fall. They wanted to rewrite the story, with Chloe as the rightful heir and me as the temporary, undeserving caretaker who had finally been put in her place. Leo, ever the calm lawyer, took a deep breath. Chloe, Mark, this is not the time or the place. You've made your point, now leave. He put a firm hand on my back, a silent message, don't engage, not now. Mark looked at Chloe and she gave a slight nod. Their work was done. They turned and walked back through the house, the front door closing with a definitive click behind them. The silence they left in their wake was heavier than before. The remaining guests looked at me, their faces full of pity. The beautiful party I had planned, a celebration of life and love, had been turned into a public execution of my happiness. My best friend, Sarah, wrapped me in a hug. Don't listen to them, Rosie. They're insane. This can't be legal. But as I stood there in the middle of my grandmother's garden, surrounded by the scent of roses and the wreckage of my birthday, all I could feel was a profound sense of dread. Chloe was a real estate agent, and Mark was a financial advisor. They were professionals who dealt with contracts, deeds, and loopholes for a living. They wouldn't have made such a bold, public move unless they were absolutely certain they had won. I looked at the house, its windows glowing warmly in the twilight, and for the first time, it didn't feel like mine. It felt like a crime scene, and I was the victim. The week that followed the party was a blur of sleepless nights and anxious days. The eviction notice, a cold, formally worded letter from a law firm I didn't recognize, arrived 2 days later. It gave me 7 days to vacate, citing the newly filed deed transfer. The document number was listed, making it feel terrifyingly real. My home had been turned into a prison, with the ticking clock of the eviction date as my warden. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the leaves outside the window, sounded like a countdown. Leo was my rock. He spent hours on the phone, calling the county clerk's office, trying to get a copy of the deed Chloe had brandished. "It's real, Rosie," he told me, his voice heavy with frustration. "It was filed 8 days ago. It looks legitimate on the surface. It has a signature, Rachel Miller, and a notary stamp." "But how?" I asked, pacing the length of the restored Persian rug in the lee. "Ving room. Grandma would never have done that. She wanted me to have this house. She wrote it in her will." "A will distributes property upon death," Leo explained patiently, though I could hear the strain in his voice. "But a deed transfer, if signed and executed while the person is alive, can supersede the will for that specific property. If Grandma signed the house over to Chloe before she passed, then it was no longer hers to give away in the will. The question is, did she sign it?" We both knew the answer. It was impossible. Grandma Rachel was sharp as a tack until the very end. She was also a woman of her word. If she had changed her mind, she would have told me. She wouldn't have done it in secret, leaving a time bomb for her lawyer to misplace, and for Chloe to detonate at the most painful moment possible. "The signature could be forged," I said, grabbing onto the sliver of hope. "It could be," Leo agreed. "But proving forgery is difficult and expensive. We'd need handwriting experts and a lengthy court battle. Chloe and Mark are counting on you not having the resources or the fight for that." He was right. I had poured most of my savings into the house's restoration. A long, drawn-out legal fight against Chloe, who had Mark's money and a team of cutthroat lawyers, felt like a battle I was destined to lose. Despair began to set in, thick and suffocating. I started packing boxes, a heartbreaking and surreal task. I folded my clothes, wrapped my dishes, and took down the paintings I had so carefully hung. Each packed item felt like a surrender. On the 5th day, with only 2 days left before I had to be out, I was in Grandma's old study. This room was my favorite. It had floor-to-ceiling bookshelves, a cozy fireplace, and her old mahogany desk. It was the heart of the house, where she paid her bills, wrote her letters, and kept her records. I was packing the books from her desk, my hands tracing the worn leather spines of her favorite poetry collections. As I cleared the last of the books, my fingers brushed against a small, almost invisible seam in the wooden panel at the back of the knee-hole space. Curious, I pushed on it. A small section of the paneling clicked and popped open, revealing a hidden compartment no bigger than a shoebox. My heart started to pound. I had cleaned this desk a dozen times and never noticed it. Reaching inside, my fingers closed around a thick manila envelope. It was unsealed. With trembling hands, I pulled it out. My name, Rosie, was written on the front in my grandmother's familiar, elegant cursive. I sank into the desk chair, my breath catching in my throat. I opened the flap and tipped the contents onto the desk blotter. There were 2 things inside. The first was a letter, several pages long, written on her personal stationery. The second was a small, black leather-bound journal. I picked up the letter first. It began, "My dearest Rosie, if you are reading this, it means that I am gone, and that Chloe has likely done something both foolish and cruel. I am writing this because I fear I have underestimated your sister's capacity for greed, a trait she seems to have inherited from her father, and one that is being encouraged by that slick young man she is with. I hope you never have to see this letter, but a wise woman always prepares for the worst." My eyes filled with tears as I read her words. It was like hearing her voice again, calm and practical, even from beyond the grave. She went on to explain that a few months before she passed, Chloe and Mark had started pressuring her about the house. They had come over with presentations, market analyses, and financial projections. They talked about reverse mortgages and leveraging assets. They saw her home as a pile of untapped cash. "They tried to convince me to sign the house over to Chloe," she wrote. They said it was for estate planning purposes to avoid probate court. They brought documents with them and a notary who was a friend of Mark's. I knew what they were doing, Rosie. They were trying to trick me. I have always been a better actress than your sister gives me credit for. I pretended to be a frail, confused old woman. I played along. I read on, my heart pounding with a mixture of anger and awe. She described how she let them believe they were succeeding. She told them she needed to think, that she wanted her own lawyer to look things over. They became pushy, and that's when she knew she had to create a safety net for me. I will never sign that document, she wrote, but I fear they might try to forge my signature or find some other devious way to take what is yours. So, I have created my own documentation. This is my true final wish, Rosie, and it must be protected. The journal I have left with this letter contains my thoughts and a record of their visits. But the most important thing is hidden where only someone who loves this house would think to look. The letter ended with a cryptic clue. Remember where the first roses of spring bloom, my dear, under the watchful eye of the gardener's best friend. Trust Leo. He will know what to do. Be strong, be smart, and do not let them erase our history. The letter was a lifeline. It was proof. It was my grandmother reaching through time to tell me she was on my side, that she had foreseen this betrayal and had armed me for the fight. The despair that had been choking me for a week was replaced by a surge of adrenaline, a cold, clear wave of determination. I opened the small black journal. It was her diary for the last 6 months of her life. Page after page detailed Chloe and Mark's visits, the pressure they applied, and her growing concerns. She documented their arguments, their condescending tone, and their relentless focus on money. It was a perfect, contemporaneous record of their attempted coercion. My sister hadn't just been greedy. She had been actively trying to manipulate our grandmother in her final days. And when that failed, she and Mark had clearly moved on to forgery. They had created their own document and waited, thinking enough time had passed, that no one would question it. They had severely underestimated two people. The grandmother they thought was frail and confused, and the granddaughter they thought was too sentimental and weak to fight back. I picked up my phone and called Leo, my voice shaking, but not with fear, with purpose. "Leo," I said, "I think I've found it. I've found the proof we need. Grandma Rachel left us a roadmap." Leo arrived at the house within the hour, his lawyerly calm barely concealing a fierce energy. I had the letter and the journal laid out on the mahogany desk. He read them both in silence, his expression growing grimmer with each page. When he finished, he looked up at me, his eyes blazing. "This is it, Rosie," he said, his voice low. "This is more than we could have hoped for. The journal is a contemporaneous record of their undue influence. It's a gold mine, and the letter, it's a declaration of her intent." But what does she mean by the clue? We read the final lines of the letter again. "Remember where the first roses of spring bloom, my dear, under the watchful eye of the gardener's best friend. Trust Leo. He will know what to do." We were both quiet for a moment, thinking. "The first roses of spring," I murmured, walking to the window that overlooked the garden. "That would be the Rosie's delight bushes. They always bloom earliest, right by the stone bench." "Okay, so we know the location," Leo said, joining me at the window. "But what's the gardener's best friend?" My eyes scanned the garden, now cast in the long shadows of late afternoon. The stone bench, the bird bath, the old oak tree, and then I saw it. Tucked away near the rose bushes was a small stone statue of St. Francis of Assisi, the patron saint of animals and the environment. It was weathered and covered in moss, so much a part of the landscape that I barely noticed it anymore. But Grandma had loved it. She called it her garden guardian. "The statue," I breathed. "The St. Francis statue, she called it her best friend in the garden." We rushed outside, a sense of urgency propelling us. The air was cool and the scent of damp earth hung in the air. We knelt by the statue. It was heavy, set on a simple stone plinth. Leo rocked it gently. It was solid. "It's not under the statue itself," he said, tapping the plinth. "The plinth, it looks like a separate piece." Using a small garden trowel, I scraped away the dirt and moss from the base of the plinth. There, on one side, we found a faint line. It was a seam. Leo used the edge of the trowel to pry at it. With a grating sound of stone on stone, a small section of the plinth came loose. It was a stone block, cleverly disguised to look like part of the solid base. With our hearts in our throats, Leo lifted the block away. Inside the cavity it revealed was a small, watertight metal box. It was heavy for its size. We carried it back into the study as if it were a sacred relic, placing it carefully on the desk. It was locked with a simple key lock. "There's no key," I said, my hope faltering for a second. Leo examined the lock. "We don't need one." He went to the fireplace and returned with a small iron poker. With a bit of strategic maneuvering and a sharp rap, the simple lock popped open. Inside, nestled on a bed of faded velvet, was a sealed envelope addressed to Mr. Abernathy-esque, and a single, old-fashioned brass key. Beneath them was a state-of-the-art digital voice recorder, a model far too modern for my grandmother to have bought on her own. I picked up the sealed envelope. This must be for her lawyer. "Don't open it," Leo instructed. "That needs to be opened by him or in his presence. It preserves the chain of custody." He picked up the voice recorder and pressed the play button. My grandmother's voice filled the room, as clear and steady as if she were sitting right there with us. "For the record, the date is March 14th. This is Rachel Miller. My grandson, Leo Miller, is also present and is operating this device for me." Leo's voice, younger and slightly nervous, confirmed the date and his presence. My eyes widened in surprise. "You knew about this?" Leo held up a hand, his attention fixed on the recording. "She called me a few days after their big estate planning ambush. She told me she was worried and needed my help to create an insurance policy. She made me swear not to tell you unless it became absolutely necessary. She didn't want you to worry. I helped her buy this recorder and set up this time capsule." On the recording, Grandma Rachel's voice continued, calm and resolute. She detailed the meeting with Chloe and Mark, describing their proposal to have her sign over the deed. Then came the bombshell. "I have the document they wanted me to sign right here," she said. "They left a copy with me to review. I am going to sign it now in Leo's presence, but I am not signing my name." There was a pause, and we could hear the scratch of a pen on paper. "I have signed it Duress, D-U-R-E-S-S, and I have dated it with today's date. If any other document appears with my supposed signature transferring ownership of my home, it is a forgery." I gasped. She hadn't just predicted their move, she had preemptively invalidated it. She had created a piece of evidence that would prove any other version of that document was fraudulent. But she wasn't done. "Furthermore," her voice continued, a hard edge creeping into it, "I am now going to execute a codicil to my will. Leo has drafted it for me according to my specific instructions. He will notarize it, and we are recording this for posterity." On the recording, Leo's voice read a short, formal legal document. It was a codicil, an amendment to her existing will. It stated that in the event that any heir contested the will or was found to have acted with malicious intent or undue influence against her or her estate, that heir's portion of the inheritance, all of it, would be immediately nullified and redistributed to the remaining heirs. It was a disinheritance clause aimed directly at Chloe. The recording ended. Leo and I sat in stunned silence, the weight of my grandmother's foresight settling over us. She hadn't just been a sweet old lady who loved roses. She had been a brilliant, strategic woman who saw the darkness in her own granddaughter and had laid a perfect, inescapable trap. She had trusted that I would find the clues and that Leo would know how to execute the plan. "What's the key for?" I asked, looking at the brass key still in the box. Leo picked it up, a slow smile spreading across his face. "I think I know. Mr. Abernathy mentioned that your grandmother kept a safe deposit box at the downtown bank. She was the only key holder. He assumed it just had old jewelry or bonds in it. I bet the original, signed codicil is in there." The pieces were all there. The letter, the journal, the audio recording, and now, the key to the final, damning piece of evidence. Chloe and Mark thought they were playing chess with a pawn. They had no idea they were playing against a queen, and she was 5 moves ahead of them, even in death. "So what do we do now?" I asked, my voice filled with a new, unshakable confidence. Leo's smile turned predatory. "Now, we don't just defend, we attack. We let them walk a little further into their own trap. They want a legal fight? We're going to give them a massacre." The eviction deadline was the next day. Per Leo's instructions, I did the last thing Chloe and Mark would ever expect. I complied. With the help of Leo and a few close friends, I moved my packed boxes into a small, temporary storage unit. I took my personal belongings, my clothes, and a few sentimental items. I left the house's furniture, the pieces that had belonged to Grandma Rachel, exactly where they were. I wanted the house to look as if I had just stepped out for a moment. Finally, I took cuttings from each of Grandma's rose bushes, carefully wrapping their stems in damp paper towels. I would not let her legacy die. On the final day, I cleaned the house from top to bottom. It gleamed. It was a silent act of defiance, a way of showing them that I was a guardian, not a squatter. As I polished the mahogany desk in the study, I could almost feel my grandmother's presence, a quiet nod of approval. At precisely 5 p.m., the time stated on the eviction notice, I locked the front door, slid the keys into a sealed envelope, and left them in the mailbox. It was the hardest thing I'd ever had to do, walking away from my home. But it wasn't a retreat, it was a strategic repositioning. I moved into Leo's spare bedroom. From our new command center, we began to build our case. The first step was a visit to Mr. Abernathy. The old lawyer was shocked and appalled when we told him what Chloe had done. He remembered her and Mark's visit about estate planning and how he had firmly advised Grandma Rachel against any such transfer. When Leo played the audio recording for him, Mr. Abernathy's face went pale. "That clever, wonderful woman," he murmured, shaking his head in admiration. "She never told me she went through with recording this." He took the sealed envelope from Leo and opened it with a letter opener. Inside was a signed statement from Grandma detailing everything and a formal letter authorizing him to act on my behalf using the contents of the safe deposit box. The next day, Mr. Abernathy and Leo, armed with the brass key and the proper legal authority, went to the bank. An hour later, Leo called me. "You are not going to believe this, Rosie," he said, his voice buzzing with excitement. "The codicil is here, signed and notarized, but that's not all." She left a signed, sworn affidavit detailing the forgery fears, and she left the original deed transfer document they gave her, the one she signed duress on. It's all here. It's an ironclad case. But Leo's plan was more subtle than simply filing a lawsuit. A public court case could get messy and take years, he explained that evening. Chloe and Mark would drag your name through the mud. We're going to resolve this with surgical precision. We're going to let their own greed spring the trap. His plan was brilliant. We knew Chloe, a real estate agent, and Mark, a financial advisor, hadn't gone to all this trouble just to live in the house. They saw it as a high-value asset to be liquidated. Their goal was to sell it and sell it fast, so we would let them. Leo used a legal maneuver to file a lease pendens against the property. It was a notice that the property's title was the subject of a legal dispute. It wouldn't stop a sale, but it would appear on any title search, acting as a massive red flag to any potential buyer and their lender. It was a tripwire. Meanwhile, Chloe and Mark were moving with alarming speed. Just 1 week after I moved out, a large for sale sign from Chloe's real estate agency was hammered into the front lawn. The online listing was heartbreaking. It described the house as a prime redevelopment opportunity, with vintage charm ready for a modern touch. The photos were of my painstakingly restored rooms, now described as blank canvases. They listed it for an aggressive, slightly below market price to encourage a quick sale. My friends were furious, calling me daily to report on the open houses Chloe was hosting. They said she was parading through the rooms, telling prospective buyers how her sentimental sister had been unable to manage the upkeep and how she had stepped in to save the family legacy. She was painting me as incompetent and herself as the hero. Every word was another turn of the knife, but Leo urged me to stay patient. "Let her find a buyer," he said. "Let her get all the way to the closing table." The higher they climb, the harder they fall. It took less than a month for them to get an offer. A young couple, developers with cash, offered the full asking price. They wanted a quick closing. Chloe and Mark were ecstatic. I imagined them celebrating, toasting to their victory and the huge payday that was just weeks away. They had no idea about the lease pendants waiting for them in the title report. The call came to Mr. Abernathy 2 weeks before the scheduled closing date. It was the title company's lawyer. The lease pendants had appeared, and the sale was now on hold. The buyers were getting nervous. Their lawyer demanded to know the nature of the dispute. This was the moment Leo had been waiting for. He instructed Mr. Abernathy to send a single, simple package to the title company's lawyer, with a copy sent directly to Chloe's managing broker at her real estate agency. The package contained just 3 items: a copy of Grandma Rachel's original, notarized while leaving me the house, a copy of the disinheritance codicil, and a transcript of the audio recording where Grandma stated any other deed was a forgery. The package was a ticking bomb, and we had just handed it to them. We didn't send it to Chloe and Mark. We sent it to the professionals whose reputations and licenses were now on the line. The title company, faced with evidence of a fraudulent title transfer, would refuse to issue insurance, killing the sale instantly. And Chloe's boss, upon learning his star agent was involved in felony-level fraud, would be forced to act to protect his company. For 3 days, there was silence. It was the most nerve-wracking 72 hours of my life. I didn't know what was happening, what was being said in those legal offices and boardrooms. I just had to trust in my grandmother's plan and in Leo's execution of it. Then on the 4th day, my phone rang. It was Chloe. I let it go to voicemail. A minute later, a text message appeared. "We need to talk, call me." I ignored it. Then Mark called. I ignored him too. The text's back. Aim more frantic. "Rosie, this is a misunderstanding. Your lawyer is trying to blackmail us. Pick up the phone, you're destroying my career." The quiet architect of this plan, my grandmother, had designed a flawless structure. And the walls were now closing in on my sister and her fiancé. They had nowhere to run. They had been so loud and public in my humiliation, and now their downfall would happen in the quiet, sterile offices of lawyers and brokers, the very world they thought they commanded. The next step wasn't mine to take. It was theirs, and I knew exactly what they would have to do. The meeting was set for the following Monday at Mr. Abernathy's office. It was a neutral ground, but it felt like my home turf. Chloe and Mark had requested the meeting through their lawyer, a man whose voice on the phone with Leo had sounded tired and utterly defeated. They were coming not to negotiate, but to surrender. I walked into the conference room with Leo at my side. I felt a calm I hadn't experienced in months. It was the calm of knowing you are standing on solid ground, holding all the cards. Chloe and Mark were already there, sitting opposite us at the long, polished table. They looked terrible. Chloe's face was pale and drawn, her usual confident posture replaced by a tense, hunched defensiveness. Mark, who had always seemed so smug and untouchable, stared at the table, refusing to meet my eye. His power suit looked like a costume he no longer had the energy to inhabit. Mr. Abernathy sat at the head of the table, a silent, venerable judge. He nodded at us as we sat down, his expression unreadable. Chloe's lawyer, a man named Mr. Davies, cleared his throat and began. "We are here today to resolve the dispute regarding the property at 12 Chestnut Grove," he said, his tone flat and professional. "My clients, Ms. Chloe Miller and Mr. Mark Thompson, are prepared to sign a quitclaim deed, relinquishing any and all claims to the property and transferring the title back to Ms. Rosie Miller, effective immediately." He slid a document across the table. Leo picked it up, reviewed it carefully, and nodded. It was a full legal surrender of the house. Chloe couldn't maintain her silence. "This is blackmail," she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "You sent that information to my broker. They've suspended my license pending an investigation. You're trying to ruin me." Leo looked at her, his expression cold. "Ruin you? Chloe, let's be very clear about what has happened. You and your fiancé attempted to steal a house through deed fraud and forgery. That's a felony. You then attempted to sell the stolen property. That's another felony. I haven't sent anything to the district attorney's office. Yet, what your broker chose to do to protect his business is a consequence of your actions, not ours. Mark finally looked up, his face a mask of panic. We were just trying to enact what we thought Grandma wanted, he blurted out. She was getting confused. We thought she signed it. Confused? Mr. Abernathy spoke for the first time, his voice quiet but carrying immense weight. I spoke with Rachel Miller the week before she passed. She was as sharp as anyone in this room. She was also a woman of great integrity. The idea that you thought she was confused is, frankly, an insult to her memory. He let the words hang in the air. I looked at my sister, at the person who had shared a childhood with me, and felt a profound sadness mix with my anger. She knew, Chloe, I said softly. Grandma knew what you were trying to do. She wrote me a letter. She kept a journal. She knew you were pressuring her. Chloe's face crumpled. The last of her defiance seemed to drain away, replaced by a raw, ugly despair. This was the part she hadn't counted on the ghost in the machine. She had been so focused on the legal documents and the money that she had forgotten who our grandmother really was, a woman who saw everything. That's not all, Leo said, his voice bringing the proceedings back to the point. He placed a copy of the codicil on the table. As you know, your grandmother's will stipulated that her savings be split between you and Rosie. However, she also prepared this codicil. He slid it towards Mr. Davies, who read it quickly, his eyebrows shooting up. The codicil states, Leo announced to the room, that if any heir is found to have acted with malicious intent or brought a frivolous contest against her will, their entire inheritance is forfeit. By filing a forged deed to circumvent the will, you have triggered this clause. Your half of the savings, Chloe, is no longer yours. It now belongs to Rosie. The sound Chloe made was a choked sob. It wasn't just the house she had lost. It was everything. Her greed had cost her the very thing she was chasing. Mark stared at her, his expression shifting from panic to cold, calculating anger. I could see him mentally distancing himself from her, from the bad investment she had become. Their alliance, built on a foundation of greed, was crumbling right before my eyes. Now, Leo said, leaning forward. Here is what is going to happen. You will both sign the quitclaim deed right now. You will also sign a non-disclosure agreement, promising to never speak of this matter again. You will issue a formal, written apology to Rosie. In return, we will not pursue criminal charges, and we will not sue you for the emotional distress and financial costs you have caused. He paused, letting the terms sink in. This is not a negotiation. This is the only offer on the table. You have 5 minutes to decide. There was nothing to decide. Mr. Davies leaned over and whispered urgently to Chloe and Mark. After a moment, he nodded to Leo. They agree. For the next 20 minutes, there was only the sound of a pen scratching on paper. They signed everything: the deed that returned my home, the document that relinquished Chloe's inheritance, the apology, the NDA. As Chloe signed the last page, her hand was shaking so badly she could barely form her name. She pushed the papers away and stood up, not looking at anyone, and walked out of the room. Mark, after a moment's hesitation, followed her without a word. Their partnership in crime was dissolved. I sat there, looking at the stack of signed documents. The keys to my house were placed neatly on top. It was over. I had won. But it didn't feel like the triumphant victory I had imagined. It felt quiet, somber, and deeply sad. My grandmother had protected me, but in doing so, she had revealed a truth about my sister that could never be unseen. Mr. Abernathy reached across the table and placed his hand gently on mine. Your grandmother would be very proud of you, Rosie, he said kindly. You protected her legacy. I nodded, unable to speak. Leo put an arm around my shoulders. Let's go home, he said, and for the first time in a month, the words felt true. Walking back into the house on Chestnut Grove was a surreal experience. It was exactly as I had left it, clean and quiet, waiting for me. The late afternoon sun streamed through the windows, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. It felt like the house itself was taking a deep, contented breath. I walked through the rooms, running my hand along the familiar furniture, the smooth, cool wood of the banister, the worn fabric of my grandmother's favorite armchair. It was mine again. Truly mine, this time secured not just by love, but by a hard-won legal battle. The first thing I did was call a locksmith. Even though I had the keys back, I couldn't stand the thought of Chloe or Mark having ever possessed a copy. I needed a clean break, a symbolic and physical securing of my sanctuary. As the locksmith worked, replacing the old locks with new, stronger ones, the sound of the drill was like music. With each new tumbler that clicked into place, I felt a layer of the past month's anxiety fall away. New keys, new locks, a new beginning. The next few weeks were about reclaiming my space and my peace. I unpacked my boxes, placing my books back on the shelves and my clothes back in the closet. The house slowly transformed back from a property, an asset, into a home. The most joyous task was replanting the rose cuttings I had saved. I found a special place for them in the garden, a new bed where they could grow, symbolizing survival and resilience. Leo helped me handle the final financial transfers. Chloe's forfeited inheritance was a significant sum, more than enough to repay the savings I had spent on the restoration and to set up a trust for the house's future upkeep. It was a bitter irony that Chloe's greed had ended up funding the very preservation she had mocked. I received the written apology, a stilted, lawyer-approved letter that expressed regret for the misunderstandings. It was meaningless, but it was a part of the settlement, another document for my archives. I filed it away and tried not to think about it. I didn't hear from Chloe directly. I heard through the family grapevine that her real estate license was under indefinite suspension and that she and Mark had broken up. He had wasted no time cutting his losses. Last I heard, she had moved to a different city, trying to start over. There was no dramatic confrontation, no tearful reconciliation. Our relationship had been a casualty of the war she had started, and there was nothing left to salvage from the wreckage. Some days, this brought me a profound sense of loss. I mourned the sister I thought I had, or at least the sister I wished she could have been. But mostly, I felt a quiet sense of relief. The constant tension, the simmering resentment that had underscored our interactions for years, was finally gone. There was just silence. One crisp autumn afternoon, a few months after I had moved back in, I was in the study, organizing some of my grandmother's old papers. I came across the black journal and the letter she had left Faux. Army, I sat in her chair and read them again. This time, I wasn't reading them as pieces of evidence in a legal battle, but as what they were, her final words to me. Her foresight, her strength, her fierce, protective love, it was all there on the page. She hadn't just left me a house, she had left me a lesson. She taught me that true strength isn't always loud. Sometimes it's quiet, patient, and meticulous. It's in the keeping of records, the tending of roots, the laying of a careful plan. She had been the quiet architect of my victory and of Chloe's downfall. I put the letter and the journal back into the manila envelope and returned them to the hidden compartment in the desk. Their work was done. They were a part of the house's history now, a secret story held within its walls. That evening, I hosted a small dinner for Leo and the close friends who had supported me. It wasn't a party, but a quiet celebration of gratitude. We ate in the dining room, and afterwards, we sat in the garden under the string of fairy lights, which I had never taken down. The air was cool, and the stars were bright. Looking at the house, lit from within, it looked peaceful and strong. It had survived, I had survived. We had protected each other. My grandmother had entrusted me to be its guardian, and in the end, her legacy, a legacy of roses and bricks, of love and shrewd wisdom, had been my guardian too. The silence on Willow Creek was no longer heavy with impending doom or the echoes of betrayal. It was a comfortable, peaceful silence. The silence of home.